Hi, I'm Michael Cohn from Advanced Tubular Technologies. In this video, I'm going to show you new additions to version 4.4 build 1854 released June 12th, 2025 to the CSM M3 DAF output, both from VTube-STEP and from VTube-LASER. So let's start with VTube-STEP. What I'm going to do first is show you that the CSM output that I changed is this one. And you can see we've got a completely new menu here with a lot of modifications to it. I've also added the capability, if you set up your bender, let's say as a bender in the bender link grid, which you will need to do if you're going to be using bender setup to correct the bender, then you're also going to have access to outputting to a bender file here. So if you move through your bender numbers, you're going to see the different benders. Well, you can send this to a bender, and then you're going to see this menu. The first change I made here is that it says the CSM rotation direction is VTube assumes that the CSM rotations rotate positive clockwise. Now that's fixed. If you find that the rotations go positive counterclockwise in any of your CSM benders, then I'll have to change this to work along with the bender link grid setup, which allows us to invert the rotation direction. Now in bender setup for VTube-LASER, it does pay attention to the inversion setup in bender link. So in this case, though, it does not. It just assumes that it's automatically inverted so that positive is clockwise. VTube will store the state of all operations, which means all of these checkboxes, radio buttons, value boxes, they all get stored because it's going to assume that you want to use the same state over and over. So that's something that's new. If you want to use a template, which you'll need to use a template in order to control values that VTube doesn't understand, then you'll need to set up different templates. And I'd recommend that you set up a DAF file for each of your different bender types that have, let's say, different pullback values in the first Y. Like that's typically a negative value in the CSM M3 control. And then save it into this folder. This folder is C:\users public documents VTube CSM, and then use those as you need them. For example, you might want to create one for a 50mm bender. You might want to create another one for a 100mm bender because they're going to have different setup values initially. But you need to have this template established. This open button does nothing more than set the file name in here. If you want to edit that template, then you have to click on this button and it loads it into the Notepad++ editor, which is part of the install of VTube. And I'm just going to show you that the defaults here may not be appropriate for you. For example, the speeds are all set to the full speed of 9. And in some cases, you'll want to reduce those for safety. So you can do that using the components below. And I want to show you what I mean by that, the components below in these tab menus. So for example, you can set the Y and the B and the C speeds to something lower in all of the columns. So for general data, there is a case in some situations where we don't want to set the number of steps. So we just ignore whatever's there. We let the CSM control the number of steps in the template. You might want to set or not set any of these values. In the XYZ tab, you can set the XYZ centerline data to all zeros or whatever's in the VTube. You can also control all of these YBC values. You can copy the VTube LRA values into the CSM YBC. You can also set these values to 0 to ensure that they are actually a safe value. For example, the rolls. You're not push bending in this case for this part, so you want them to be 0 for sure. And then over here we have tools. So you can see that in the tools page, we've got the idea of setting up the radius values. The radius values are arranged like this: 0's on the bottom, 1's next, and 2 is on top of that. And you can see here that the value was set to 66. The reason why the value is set to 66 is because over here in part setup, the radius was 66. So that value is automatically copied in if it's there. So then you can make that part of the output file if you want. Keep in mind that these values are always metric. The reason is because all values that are output to CSM DAF files are always metrics. When you're ready to select the file name and export this to the DAF file, it's going to load in the template file It's going to merge all of this data in the way you've set it up, and then it's going to save it to the new file name. And if you check on this box, it's going to allow you to display the new file in an editor after it's exported. So I'm going to go ahead and select a file name, and it's going to call out to our bender link path that was set up. And I'm going to say this is going to be CSM test 1, and this is a new build. So I'm just going to do this because we'll be loading this directly into the bender. So let's just go out to look at a speed, for example, to see if it changed it. Now our speeds are 5 everywhere. And you're going to see the Y, the B, and the C values. This first Y value is a pullback value. It's always ignored by VTube. Your first angle, your second angle, etc. All of that information then is used to load into the control. And then you go to VTube-LASER, bring the part back to VTube-LASER and measure it. Let's say the part is not inside tolerance, which I've simulated here on the screen. Go into Bender Setup, and Bender 1 is still CSM M3 DAF file. And in this case, it's important to remember before you correct the Bender file, it's critical that you perform a recall because we need to bring in the correction values, or what CSM calls the offset values. So I'm going to recall the file that I created, and this was used to run the part, the bender. Now, if you make any changes to this file, make sure you save it back to this file because VTube needs to have access to that. I'm going to open that in, and it's just going to ask you a few questions if it finds some differences, which you can just say, use the incoming part number. If it wants you to add more rows, just allow it to do that. VTube can figure that out, and the CSM should have control over the row number count, even if it doesn't match VTube. Now you can see here, let me just make sure that our corrections are set at 100%, that the adjustment for the first bend is 0.6 and the adjustment for the second bend is 1.4, right here and right here. Now we're going to go ahead and send this out. I'm going to create another new DAF. This is new corrected. Now you don't have to save a new file every time, but you could if you want to keep the original file in case something goes wrong. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and create a new file for correction. I'm going to go to Notepad, and I want to load that file in. So let me find that file. Okay, now I've loaded the corrected file in, and we're going to go down to the values that represent the CSM offsets, which are adjustments or correction values from VTube. The first bend angle should be adjusted by 0.6. It is. And the next bend angle should be adjusted by 1.4. And it is. So VTube never touches the nominal values from inside VTube-LASER's bender setup, ever. It only adjusts the offset values. It's really important to remember that. Now, in order to demonstrate what happens, let's say you bend your next part and you bring it over and measure it and find that it's still out of tolerance, then it's important when you get back into bender setup into here that you recall again, because we're going to assume that VTube needs to bring those new offsets, which are the correction values that VTube created, back into memory. So I'm going to do a recall, and I'm going to take the new corrected file now, bring it in, and here we go. We're going to see now that we have different values, for example, in the blue columns, because this angle is now the first angle plus the first offset. Now we have another offset of 0.6. So we're going to go ahead and send this again. This time I'm going to make it new corrected. This is going to be test 2 for that. Now let's get into that menu again and bring in the new one that we just corrected. Now, if this works the way it should, then you should see the correction value change every time. And it does. Here's the correction value for the first bend angle. It doubled, which it should. And double down here, 2.8. Now, obviously, I didn't do a real correction to the bender, but if you had done that, these values are going to adjust after you do a recall and then a send every time you do a correction. Please keep in mind not to auto send the same corrections multiple times, because that will just keep accumulating the offsets, and that's bad. You'll lose control of the corrections loop if you do that. So that's how the new CSM M3 DAF file export and corrections work in VTube-LASER. If you have any questions about any of this, please feel free to email me or my team at support@advancedtubular.com. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Have a great day.